All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Panhandle Birding 101 webinar from the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. My name is Laura Smedzard. I'm the environmental educator based out of Scotts Bluff. So let's get started. A little bit about our organization and who we are. We're a nonprofit organization based out of Brighton, Colorado, kind of down by Denver. But our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats through science, education, and land stewardship. They all work together to drive our mission, which is birds and bird conservation. We want to conserve birds and their habitats. And for up in the Panhandle, you know, we're not in the Rocky Mountains, but birds are very rarely in just one place their entire lives. They're migrating, they're moving around. So we do lots of good work up in Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, all the way down to northern Mexico. And so why is there a bird conservancy in the first place? Why are we not the spider conservancy or the lizard conservancy? Birds have been inspirational to people for thousands of years, whether it's artwork or sports teams, or, I mean, we built planes in order to fly like them. They're very inspirational. They're also very accessible. No matter where a person lives, they can probably see birds. And with this birding webinar, we'll talk a lot more about that, how accessible bird watching is as a hobby. Birds also provide a lot of really important ecosystem services, such as pest control and seed dispersal. There's plenty of pests that are harmful to crops and livestock and people that are a bird's favorite treat. And then there's lots of plants that wouldn't flower or grow without passing through the digestive system of a bird. Lastly, they do a lot of really important things in the environment, environmental indicators, kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Look to birds to see if an ecosystem is healthy. They're one of the first groups of animals to be affected by environmental changes. This usually is for temperature, or if there's no bugs in the area. Birds love to eat bugs, like I said a little bit ago. So if there's no bugs, there's probably no birds. It's probably not a very healthy environment. And today for our birding webinar, we're gonna focus on the top two, how they're inspirational and accessible through the hobby of bird watching. So, and birding. We're gonna cover what is birding. I know it sounds like a stupid question, but for some people, they need a little bit more information. I don't think there's such a thing as a stupid question. You'll get a little bit of insight on how to get started with birding, some kind of equipment that's very helpful. We'll go over some tips for identifying birds. There's a few key things to look for. And then we'll jump into birding hotspots in the Panhandle and some notable species that you'll find at these different places. I included lots of pictures and some really good resources. And then with Bird Conservancy, we have a lot of birding events going on this month. It is Nebraska's Bird Month, so we can celebrate Bird Month in May. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll want to celebrate birds every month. I know I do. So what is birding? The actual definition of birding is it's a hobby where you're observing birds in their natural habitat. But it's kind of a vague definition in that it can mean lots of things to different people. To me, my first experiences with birding and bird watching was looking out the window at my mom's bird feeders. I grew up in north central Minnesota, surrounded by lots of trees. So I was seeing birds all the time at the bird feeders and a few raccoons. But so to me, that was my first intro to birding and bird watching. I know some people take this hobby to the extreme where it's like they're checking birds off of a list. Kind of the slang is they're listers, where they're traveling a long way, maybe hundreds if not thousands of miles, to check these birds off their list, to see the bird, to photograph the bird. And that's what's really cool about this hobby, is that you can be on one side of the spectrum where you're just looking out the window at your bird feeders, or just looking outside your neighborhood or local park. You can also be on the other side where you are a lister, where this is what you do. This is who you are. It's your takes up a lot of time and energy, but you're seeing hundreds and hundreds of birds every year. So to kind of get started, you can get some equipment. It's not all necessary, but it is helpful. Birding can be as simple as looking out your window, or you have the latest and greatest in binoculars or spotting scopes, which are the really big telescope looking things to see birds from hundreds of yards away. And there's all sorts of books and apps and stuff like that. So binoculars, they will help you see birds further away and pick up important field marks. There's lots of different binoculars out there. I like to stick with your basic 8x42. The 8 stands for the magnification power, so how far away you can see it, how much it's blown up. And then the last number is how big your lenses are in millimeters. So 8 is 8 times magnification. 42 is that your lenses are 42 millimeters wide. So binoculars are not necessary. They are very helpful because there are some identifying marks on birds that it's just like little marks on their faces or little spots on their tails that you need to be able to see, and you wouldn't be able to see without binoculars. The next really good, useful equipment for birding is field guides or apps. I have all of these bird field guides. I have used all of them in one capacity or another. I said earlier, I grew up in Minnesota looking out my window at the birds. This was my first field guide. This is Birds of Minnesota by Stan Tequila. And it's organized by color. So up here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's little color indicators where depending on what color the bird is, you can find them easily in that. They make these for all the different United States. So no matter where you are, you can start bird watching. There's National Geographic. There's the National Audubon Society. There's Sibley. These other field guides are organized taxonomically. So the birds are broken up into families, and that's how they're organized in the book. These will have a lot more information than the color-coded field guides, but both are useful in their own way. If books get a little heavy for you, you can download some really helpful apps. There's the Merlin Bird ID app. This is put out through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. There's also Audubon puts out their own app. And then another app that is really helpful, not with just bird identification, but also keeping track of the birds that you see. It's called eBird, where you can figure out what birds you're seeing, but then you can keep a list of the birds that you're seeing when you go out each time. So lots of really good resources. And then the last piece of equipment is patience and willing to put in a little bit of time. It's a lifelong hobby. It's a fairly easy hobby to get into, and you get what you put into it. It takes patience. You can be a casual observer of your bird feeder, but you can also be a lister where you're out on the prowl for that one really elusive bird that's 2 or 3 states away, but you heard about on eBird. So like it takes patience. I'm not trying to be funny. It really just does take some time and practice. So we'll jump into some tips for identifying a bird. Sometimes people kind of don't know where to start or like what to look for. These are kind of just general categories of things to look for, and you need to kind of combine 2 or 3 of them in order to really nail down what the bird is. But really what it comes down to is you're starting to make these patterns and categories in your brain where you're sorting the thousands of species that occur in the United States. So you're sorting, like, is this bird a forest bird? Is this a grassland bird? Is this a bird that even occurs in the Midwest? You know, speaking of Nebraska. So creating these pathways, creating these categories is a way for us to sort through and become a little bit quicker in our identifying. So I want to give this example here. This is an American robin, and we can kind of tell what it is by some different things. So most people see the red breast, they see them, which would be the color pattern and field marks. They see them on the ground pulling worms. That's the behavior. Habitat, they're usually in the neighborhoods. The size and shape, they kind of have a unique shape. Their wings stick out a certain way. And then their songs and calls, they're usually the first ones that you hear every morning, where they're cheer up, cheerily. So all of these things together can help you identify a bird. Birds really don't do anything for fun, or their, evolution and natural selection has really honed in all of these birds' characteristics and behaviors and body parts and shapes and colors to serve a purpose, to survive in their environment. So anything that a bird is doing or what it looks like will help you identify a bird. So we have to really hone in on our observation skills. And we'll go into detail each one in these next few slides. So habitat. Habitat is you're asking yourself where you are and what season it is. Now, they do sound like stupid questions. They sound like the questions that you would be asked, like if you were in a hospital to see if you were coherent, like what year is it? Where are you? But these are really good, important observations to make, because here in Nebraska, there's a little bit of an overlap with typically Eastern species and typically Western United States species. That's why I have my two Sibley books. I have this an Eastern one and a Western one, because there is an overlap. But not all the birds that are here in Nebraska are here year round. We're in a really important migration flyway. It's called the Central Flyway, where lots of birds are using this area to go north and south throughout the year. So to give some Panhandle, Western Nebraska specific examples, in the bottom left corner, I have a picture of a bird. It's called a snow bunting. And the name is fitting because these birds will nest up in the Arctic tundra. They're up there during the summer, and then they come down here in the wintertime, because where they breed is way too cold. So they actually come down here to the United States to warm up during the wintertime. So these are the birds that you'll see that are kind of flocked together in ditches where there's never just one. There's usually 10 to 15 of them, and they're little white birds. They're snow buntings. You won't see these in the summertime. You'll only see them in the wintertime here in Nebraska. And then on the right, this is a good example for birds that are only occurring in certain habitats. So where are you? Are you in a forest? Are you in the grasslands? Are you by the water? This bird is called a spruce grouse. And again, like its name, they really only occur in evergreen forests, in spruce forests. We don't really have a whole lot of those in Nebraska. So you can start ruling out birds very easily just by making those observations of what time of year it is and your habitat. The next one that we're going to cover is the size and the shape of a bird. It's not usually helpful to make the observation, look at a bird, and it's like, that bird is 7 inches tall. That's really hard to do. And birds won't stand still for you to get out your ruler and go and measure it. It's really good to kind of start practicing having reference birds where you know the sizes of these birds. So you can start comparing, like, this bird is bigger than a robin. It's smaller than a robin. It's as big as a mallard duck. It's smaller. Just, it's another tool to start categorizing and ruling out different species. And then become familiar with common silhouettes of birds. Again, it sounds silly, but if you are looking at a bird and it's shaped like a duck, it's shaped like an owl, just having those kind of reference or silhouettes in your brain already is really valuable. Just kind of getting that practice. So a good example that I like to show for size and shape of a bird, how it's not always, or sorry, I'll back up. Size and shape is important to reference in this picture, because if you look, these two birds, these are two different species of woodpeckers, but look at the size difference, where unless they were right next to each other, like in this picture, it'd actually be pretty hard to nail down which species it is. So the one on the left is a hairy woodpecker. I always like to think hairy, huge, because the one on the right is a downy woodpecker. So I always think downy is dinky, small, dinky. So that's how I can keep them straight. So pairing size and shape with the colors, with the silhouette, is a really good start in observation for bird identification. The next one is color pattern in field marks. So with color, that's usually the first thing that people observe. They're seeing the red tail of the red-tailed hawk, or it's a bright blue blue jay, or a red cardinal. But color gets to be tricky when you're trying to identify, the little brown sparrow that's just hopping around in the bushes, or you're way far away and you just kind of, the bird looks like a blob. Or, as is the case with the goldfinches down at the bottom, these are American goldfinches. Both of these birds are male birds, but the one in the left, the bright yellow one, is in the summer. That's its breeding plumage. And then the kind of olive drab color, that's its winter plumage. So it's the same gender of bird, same species of bird, just at a different point in time. So learning, combining the color with the size and shape, with the habitat. You can't always identify a bird by itself with the color. And then field marks, those are, the different body parts or patterns on a bird that are colored a certain way that kind of help you clue into what it is. So the red tail of the red-tailed hawk. Another one is a black cap on a black-capped chickadee. That's at the top of its head. Or on the goldfinch here, you can see its wing. These little white sections, those are called wing bars. Where they're on the wing, there's stripes, wing bars. That's a good field mark for identifying a bird. So use these in combination with other observations and you'll do just fine. This one, behavior, I like to talk about, especially with waterfowl and other birds that are not super close, where you can maybe not see the color. You can focus on what the bird is doing. So just sit and watch the bird if possible. Is it soaring in the air? A lot of birds that are soaring in the air are eagles or hawks. Is the bird swimming in the water, like a duck or a goose? What the bird is doing can help you kind of categorize, start to figure out what it is. Because you will very rarely, if ever, see an eagle swimming in the water. or a duck just kind of soaring up in the air lazily. Birds don't do stuff for fun. They're doing, all of their behavior is to survive. So it's a really good clue to identifying a bird. The last one I'll talk about are songs and calls. So bird song, you're more likely to hear a bird than you are to see it. Almost 10 or 15 to 1, 10 or 15 birds hearing versus 1 bird you see. But just covering bird songs and calls could be its own hour-plus presentation. So just kind of start out by listening to the birds in your neighborhood, figure out what's around you. And you can start to kind of pick up on the birds that you hear singing in the morning or the afternoon, and you can start noticing patterns and see if you can either attribute like words or phrases, or it sounds like a car horn, or it sounds like a squeaky gate, stuff like that. And then on those bird ID apps that I talked about, Merlin and eBird, they will have birdsong recordings that you can kind of go back and listen to and practice. But birdsong is one of the higher level skills that birders like to be proud of, to know and be able to bird by ear. It's quite an accomplishment. So for now, try to identify the birds that you can see and then work on bird songs a little bit afterwards. It's all about practice. Okay, so we're going to put it all together and see if we can identify this bird together. So I'm going to paint the scene for you. You are driving down the highway in western Nebraska. It's summertime. Everything's green, the sky's blue. It's a gorgeous day out. And you happen to look over into the ditch, and there's that bird sitting on a pasture fence. See, it's that bird on a barbed wire fence. Okay, so let's make some observations. Maybe type in the chat what you see, and then we'll see if we can identify this bird. What are some things that you notice? Think of the different things that I shared about what to look for. So it could be the time of year is the summertime. And its habitat, it's sitting in the middle of a pasture fence, so grasslands. Some behavior, it's just sitting there. The color, I see kind of a light gray head, sort of a white chest, a yellow tummy. The white along its tail, good color. And the size of the bird, it's kind of hard to tell from the car. So you probably don't have a field guide, but that's okay. I have plenty. I was able to narrow it down for us with these 2 birds. So it can be either one of these. It is either a Cassin's kingbird or a western kingbird. So if we look at the different colors, this page is from the Sibley guide. It's from the Sibley right here. You can look at the different comparisons. You can look at the map down at the bottom. The orange color is for summertime. So if you want to type in the chat, what do we think? Do you think it's the western kingbird or the Cassin's kingbird? What do we think? We're using all of the observations, all of the little things to look for. So this bird is the western kingbird. It's the one on the left here. And I know that because if you look at the map here, Nebraska's right there. It's the orange color. That means it's in the summertime. And if you look over here on the map for the Cassin's kingbird, it is kind of hard to see, but it is possible that the Cassin's kingbird could be here during the summer. But combining the habitat and what time of year it is with the color of the bird. You see here on the western kingbird, it's a lot more white, a lot paler than the Cassin's kingbird. So that's how you kind of use the combinations of the different things that you're observing to identify a bird. So the next time that you're looking out the window, maybe start practicing those observation skills. Look at the habitat, color, size and shape, what it's doing, all that good stuff, and start identifying birds. Okay, does anyone have any questions so far? I do want to pause real quick. Any questions about the different bird tips, bird identification tips, equipment, books? You can either unmute or type in the chat, whichever one you'd like. If there are no questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the birding hotspots. This was a really fun section to research and present. So to kind of give you some context, the Panhandle of Nebraska is the western quarter of the state. It's in the short grass prairie ecosystem where grasses don't grow very high because there's not a whole lot of rain. And in certain parts, there are pine woodlands. Ponderosa pine is the primary tree out here. And then there's also badlands where it's lots of rocky ridges and canyons. But it's not all dry. The North Platte River runs through the middle and supports a lot of deciduous forests, wet meadows, and lots of tributary streams, which is actually pretty good trout fishing out here. So there's a really wide variety of habitats out in the Nebraska Panhandle, and therefore tons of different birds that you can find. A lot of my resources were taken from the Nebraska Birding Guide website. This website just launched a few days ago. It is a collaborative effort from Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, Watchable Wildlife, all sorts of really good information, pictures, where to go, what to look for, and a lot of the same tips that I provided in this webinar. And I also was able to find information on what birds to see out here from eBird, because I got it from the different birders providing lists and going out and birding. So it's a community effort all around to provide these resources. So I'm going to first cover kind of the northern panhandle, which will be like Chadron, Fox Butte County, Sheridan, Sioux County, and then I'll cover the southern panhandle, which is like Scottsbluff, Kimball, stuff like that. Okay. So first, the northern panhandle. These are kind of by Chadron and Alliance. Up in there, it's shortgrass prairie, a little bit of sandhills, but some surprising little wet meadows and reservoirs. The first one I want to talk about is Fort Robinson State Park. This is the biggest state park in Nebraska, and there's a lot of unique habitats. There's pine forests, and in some of the deeper canyons where there's badlands, the canyons will have deciduous trees because water can collect there. And those wetter canyons allow for some interesting species, like the Bullock's oriole, which is on the far left. And then on the far right is a black-headed grosbeak. These ones will be in the deciduous forest, so definitely check them out. The middle two species are going to be in the pine forests, the black-billed magpie, which is the really long-tailed bird, and then the pygmy nuthatch, which is just this tiny little bird. You see them walking up and down the trunks of the tree, looking for bugs. This, of course, is not the only 4 species of birds you can find at Fort Robinson State Park, but these are kind of my 4 favorites. So you'll have to go and check out these places yourself in order to see what's out there. Because that's what's the fun part of birding, is you don't know what you're going to find when you're out there. It's always a little bit of a surprise. Box Butte Reservoir is a really unique habitat. This one is between Chadron and Alliance, kind of equidistant out in the middle of the state, in the middle of the Panhandle. This is a 1,600-acre reservoir with lots of deciduous trees and grasslands. So this is a really unique landscape where there's, again, more deciduous trees, lots of wetland, and the surrounding grasslands. So you can see a really wide variety of birds. The most notable ones out here will be the mountain bluebird, which is that bright blue bird on the left. The middle bird is the lark bunting. So they will be in the grasslands also, really cool black and white bird. And then the Clark's grebe, which I love this picture. That's them doing a courtship dance where they'll kind of run across the water. It's a sight to see. It's definitely a unique experience. And then with all of these trees and water surrounding the area, there's going to be a lot of migrating warblers through the area. I know, Paula, you asked a question for guides for warblers in Nebraska. I guess I don't know the answer to that, but definitely check out the Nebraska Birding Guide. They have species-specific information, so you'll just have to hunt through there. But yes, warblers usually or can have their own field guide because there's so many of them and so many different colors that they need their own book. So yeah, definitely come to Box Butte Reservoir for those warblers. And the last one that I want to highlight in the northern Panhandle is the Gilbert Baker Wildlife Management Area. This is a bit of a drive from me. I'm located in Scottsbluff. This is kind of in the way northwest corner of the Panhandle. But because of where it is, you get a really cool overlap of Western species and Eastern species. So the Western species that are usually in Colorado and Wyoming and Montana will come down here occasionally. So again, ponderosa pine forests, deciduous forests, and scattered grasslands, lots of rocky areas, really wide variety of habitat. And some really cool Western species that we can see are the Western tanager. That's that yellow bird with the bright red head. You can also see what are called pinion jays. This is the only place in Nebraska that it's recorded that they nest because they are typically a Western species. They're the size and shape of a blue jay, just without the crest. And then some other really cool birds you can see is a Say's phoebe. That's that kind of brownish bird with the cinnamon or orangish belly. And then in the wintertime, kind of the off season, so to say, you can see the Townsend solitaire at the Gilbert Baker Wildlife Management Area. This is a bird where it doesn't move around a whole lot. It's pretty quiet, so it's an extra special treat if you can catch one in your binoculars. I know of one other place that my coworkers and I have been able to see a Townsend solitaire in the southern Panhandle, and I'll share that in a second, so you don't have to drive as far. Okay. So the southern Panhandle, that's going to be Scottsbluff, Kimball, Sidney, the Sandhills, the shortgrass prairie, kind of down in here. And this is where the North Platte River kind of runs diagonally through the state, through the southern part of the Panhandle, and onwards to the Missouri River. The first area that I want to talk about is the Wildcat Hills State Recreation Area. This is a very popular place because it's close to Scottsbluff. It's only about a 20-minute drive south. They have some unique habitats. They have some rocky ridges and grasslands and ponderosa pines. This is really the place for the birds who love the pine trees. So the red crossbill, they're built to eat pine cones. That beak is crossed a little bit so that when they open it, they open their beak, they can pry open pine cones and eat the seeds. So if there's no pine trees, there's no crossbills. So the Wildcat Hills is definitely a favorite place. The spotted towhee is the really cool looking bird with that bright reddish orangish eye. Pine siskins love Wildcat Hills. Wildcat Hills has a lot of bird feeders nearby and a big bay window where you can watch sometimes hundreds of pine siskins just eat those bird feeders empty every single day. But when you see those bird feeders empty, all the birds scatter because there's usually a predator around, and that predator is typically a Cooper's hawk, which is in the right corner. These birds love to snack on some birds that are at a bird feeder. So there's lots of really cool birding opportunities at Wildcat. It's very accessible with those bird feeders right there. Lots of really cool trails. The next place that I want to talk about is a national wildlife refuge here in the Southern Panhandle, Crescent Lake. So this is a really unique spot in the Sandhills where there's over 20 wetland complexes, which it can be a lake or a pond or a stream. It's just the whole thing is just one big wetland. So you can see lots of really unique waterfowl or shorebird species. It's also a really popular hunting area. So maybe try and avoid it in the fall or wear your blaze orange when you head out. But because they're in the Sandhills, that means grasslands. So you can also see some really cool grassland species like the sharp-tailed grouse. At the wildlife refuge here, you can reserve spots in viewing blinds because the sharp-tailed grouse put on a really cool show for the ladies, for the female birds. And if you set up in these blinds, you should be able to watch them without disturbing the birds. So it's really a cool sight to see. A really cool shorebird that you can see at the Crescent Lake is this long-billed curlew. They use that really, really long bill to probe into the ground, into the mud for insects and little good stuff to eat. And around these different wetlands, there's lots of habitat for warblers, like this common yellowthroat. So Paula, another really good place for these warblers is around these marshy areas. And then lots of waterfowl to see, like I said. The common merganser is one of the more popular or more common species that you can see, but they definitely get outnumbered by the mallards and the blue-winged teal and green-winged teal, and of course the Canada geese. But lots of really unique species. Check out their website. It'll give you a rundown of all the different species that you can see. I think there's over 30 different waterfowl species that use that area. Half of them will nest there. It's a really important stopping over point for these migrating birds, going through up from Canada down to Central America and Mexico. Kind of like the gas station, stopping and refueling. And then the last Southern Panhandle hotspot that I want to talk about is the Kiowa Wildlife Management Area. So this is an extra special place. It's designated a Nebraska Important Bird Area. A lot of geese use this area where it gets shut down. Hunting is not allowed. There's a really wide variety of habitats here too, where it's the pond in the middle of the grasslands. So there's the grassland, wetland, pond kind of spectrum. And there's a prairie dog colony down here that's big enough and old enough to support some burrowing owls. Now, burrowing owls, you can find them in lots of other places in the Panhandle. They use old prairie dog holes to burrow and raise their young. And so you don't have to travel here just to see the owls. I've seen them driving down the road, just sitting on a fence post, which is pretty cool. And some really unique shorebird species that you can find here is the American avocet. That's the bird with the upturned beak. I just think they're so unique looking. The Wilson's phalarope is another really cool species that you can see here. What's interesting about this picture is this is actually the female of the of the Wilson's phalarope. They are the more brightly colored, and they're unique in that the females don't raise the young. It's the males that raise the young. So the males, because of the switched role, they're a little more drab color. So just kind of a really cool species to observe because of their uniqueness. And then lots of different waterfowl to see here, but I like to highlight the cinnamon teal. I just think that bright red color and that bright red eye is something really unique. But you can, of course, see mallards, teal, widgeon, shovelers here as well. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about the different birding hotspots, any cool birds that you've seen in your area? I know that this presentation was really fun to put together and makes me want to just go out birding right this minute. So if you're kind of new to birding, or if you don't really know where to start, a really good place to get your resources and kind of have a community is these local birding groups. So in Nebraska, you can look for the Ornithologist Union or a local Audubon chapter. They may have birding groups, or they'll at least have the resources to kind of help you along. You can also participate in local bird counts. These are community science efforts where everyday people, everyday birders, are going out and observing as many species of birds as they can during a set amount of time. So the Great Backyard Bird Count happens in the springtime, and the Christmas Bird Count happens in the winter. So these are two really cool birding events where you can kind of find that community and go out birding. You can also look out for local parks for birding events and outings. With us, with the Bird Conservancy, we do bird walks the second Saturday of every month, and we kind of focus around the Scottsbluff area. We're also planning to go to the Kiowa area, wetland management area, and our next one is May 14th. So definitely check out our Facebook page in order to register, or just email me. I'll have that contact information at the end. And this webinar is a part of a series of events where we are celebrating Nebraska Bird Month. So we have a few different events that you can come and celebrate Bird Month with us. At the Riverside Discovery Center in Scottsbluff, we are having a family-friendly event called Birds of Play. It's a raptor discovery where we'll meet by the raptor exhibits. We'll have a keeper chat, and we'll talk about the really amazing adaptations that raptors have. And we'll play games, and we'll explore, and it'll be a lot of fun. This is, like I said, a family-friendly event, and it's free with the zoo admission. If you're going to be in Chadron in a couple weeks, we are going to be doing a Bluebird House workshop at Chadron State Park, where we provide the materials, we provide the tools for you to build a Bluebird House workshop. Having bluebirds on your property is really valuable. They're really good pest controllers, like I had mentioned at the way beginning of this presentation. Plus, they're also really cool to watch. So come hang out with us at Chadron State Park on Sunday, May 22nd in the afternoon. Registration is required just so that we know how much stuff to bring. So check out our Facebook page for details on that. And lastly, this is for the more casual bird nerd. We're going to have a trivia night up in Chadron at the Bean Broker Coffee House and Pub, where you don't have to know everything about Nebraska birds. You don't need to have a vast array of knowledge. You can just come, show up. We'll talk about sports teams, engineering, marvels that are inspired by birds, songs, pop culture, a little bit of nature trivia. It's just to celebrate birds and have a cup of coffee or another beverage while you're doing it. So that is going to be Thursday, May 26th in the evening. And if you enjoyed what you heard today and want to do more to support bird conservation, consider donating to the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. Your donations help us fill critical funding gaps since we are a nonprofit. You can keep Bird Conservancy scientists, ecologists, educators like me working to advance bird conservation from Montana all the way down to northern Mexico. So with that, I want to thank you so much for spending your evening with me. Again, my name is Laura. There's my contact information. You can also reach out to Delaney Bruce. She's the education manager here in Scottsbluff. Both of us can answer all of your birding questions or help you sign up for a lot of our fun events. You can visit our website at birdconservancy.org. And also like us on Facebook. You can stay up to date on the events, like our Bird Month events that I talked about, kind of bird conservation highlights, and just all sorts of happenings in the Panhandle. There's lots of cool stuff out here. So Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Nebraska programs, check us out on Facebook. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hang out for a second if you have any questions. It's a nice, intimate group, just a couple of us. It's a lot of fun chatting with birds with you guys.